Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Pressplay podcast. My guest today is Matt Kelley, better known in fantasy circles as the Podfather. He's a founder and CEO of PlayerProfiler and the creator of FastDraft Fantasy, the fastest best ball game on the planet, where fans are drafting six-round tournaments for real money in minutes. Over the last decade, he's helped drag fantasy football into the data era with analytics tools and a whole lot of personality. Matt, welcome to Press Play.
Hey, thanks for having me, man. Cool.
Cool, man. Awesome. So, I guess the first question, obvious one, how do you tell the story of what you're building with Player Profiler and Fast Draft today?
Well, I started Player Profiler as like 10 years ago. I can't believe it's like been a decade we've been doing this, but at the time there was not a lot of advanced stats and metrics that fantasy gamers could really access affordably. So we wanted to create an easy, affordable, user-friendly system to access stats that were, predictive of performance, whether it be air yards, whether it be target share, things of that nature. Even target share is a pretty new stat in the last 10 years. And that's something that we really popularized at Player Profiler. And during these years, promoting a lot of different fantasy platforms, I noticed that in the last, say, 5 years, especially, a lot of the innovation had sort of had left the industry, where sports betting was really capturing a lot of the sort of uh, the cerebral firepower was really being devoted to sports betting, and there was a real market inefficiency in fantasy, where fantasy is not going anywhere. Peer-to-peer gaming around sports is something that's going to be here for as long as there's going to be sports. There's going to be people getting together and creating teams and competing against each other. So I was like, there has to be the next fantasy 2.0, call it fantasy 3.0, whatever you want to call it. There's got to be something new that's going to inspire our audience at Player Profiler to play fantasy and engage even more. And sometimes you just have to do it yourself. You can't wait for someone else to build the platform or to create the format. You have to do it yourself. So that's what we ended up doing. A couple of years ago, we launched a new company, a sister company to Player Profiler called FastDraft. And FastDraft was really the TikTok of fantasy gaming, allowing people to create teams in a faster, more efficient way, a lot more efficient use of time on app, where, in the past, a draft could take more than an hour. And so we created a draft 6, start 4 best ball tournament style format, where drafts could take 5 minutes. And then we also launched a format that would compete head to head with the existing best ball formats out there as well, called the Rabbit, where people are drafting 15 players. But instead of having 12 teams, there's 10 teams. Instead of going to 22 rounds, there's only 15 rounds. Instead of a 60-second time clock, there's a 20-second time clock. So everything that we do, even if it is sort of closer to the best ball format that people remember or love, it's the fast draft way, right? It's 20
Awesome.
minutes to finish a draft as opposed to 60 minutes. So that is the revolution, is that we know that people love drafting. That is the best part of fantasy football. And we want to provide all fantasy gamers with the ability to get together with their friends, to compete for, tens of thousands of dollars by just drafting. And so that's what we've done. And we have an all rookie game now. We have an all defense game now. And now we're considering what other sports to roll out. There's a whole conversation around that. And it's really cool because the Player Profiler audience was really the first to really start playing on FastDraft. And now we have a network of 100 plus affiliates, other podcasters, websites in fantasy that are promoting the game. And it really gives them a new platform that they can talk about on their across their media channels. Like, hey, this is new, and here's some strategy so that you can win. And so that's sort of been a breath of fresh air, I think, for the fantasy industry overall. Like, hey, what's going to be the next thing that people are going to get excited about in fantasy? And FastDraft, I think last year we proved that we are it, and now we're in the middle of fundraising, our second round of fundraising, to really ramp up the marketing spend to really help to further educate and really create massive buzz around the platform in 2026, and the seeds of that have already started to grow, and it's a very exciting time.
Exciting, man. Exciting. I mean, at Pressplay Capital, we look at the sports tech space, and we'll get into some of the nitty gritties around your experience and your app, and the customer acquisition, all of that. But taking a step back, Matt, maybe share with us and the audience your background and what led you into the world of fantasy. Yeah, we'd love to know more.
Yeah, well, when I was a kid, we would collect sports cards, mostly football cards, and we would do football drafts manually with we didn't know they were fantasy drafts. That we just created a game where we'd lay out on the floor all the fantasy football cards, and then we would draft teams. Myself and three of my friends, we'd create teams, and it was sort of a combination of fantasy football and Dungeons and Dragons, where we'd build teams, and then I would be the dungeon master, and I would talk through, the podcaster that I am, I would talk through the game script, the game flow of the game, and then a winner would be crowned. And then shockingly, a lot of times my team would win, which is just,
Really?
again,
Wow.
very surprising. Very surprising. So all the way
Nice.
back before there was a such thing as fantasy football, I had a passion for this thing of this game within a game, creating fake teams with existing players. And then later on in life, like fantasy baseball, I started playing that in 2000.
Okay.
When a buddy of mine studied abroad, and he's like, "Hey, I'm not going to be able to manage my team because the time zones and all these things, because we're, when pitchers are
Yeah.
getting announced, and I'm going to be in bed, so you
Right.
gotta do my starts and sits and bench players and pick players up and all these things." And I was like, "Show me what this thing is, this fantasy baseball." And I was hooked, and I was playing, throughout my software career. Always running the fantasy leagues in the office, and always sort of minimizing the windows when the boss would come around, when the playing fantasy at work, which
Yeah.
is a time-honored tradition in the United States.
Yeah. Of course.
And as soon as that company ended up selling to private equity, and I did well in the exit of it, so that was great. And we ended up moving to Connecticut, and I had some time. I was very fortunate to have some time to reflect and be like, "Hey, what do I want to do with the next 5 years of my life?" And I was like, "Man, if I could find a way to focus on fantasy sports, that would be the dream." And at that time, podcasting was just becoming a thing. And
Right.
it's like, man, so I started just talking fantasy with one of the first fantasy football podcasts, Roto Underworld Radio. And that's how that got started. Then I was like, well, I need a tool to help me with the podcast. I need to
Right.
be able to look up players and stats and talk about them in real time on the podcast. Oh, that's how the idea to build PlayerProfiler came. It was a tool for podcasters, which then basically got turned 180 degrees to say, okay, this is a tool that I'm looking at. I'm going to turn it and have it face the world so that all fantasy gamers can access these stats the way I am while I'm podcasting. And then that's how that happened. And then, as I mentioned earlier, then I was looking around going, oh, wait, this space has really been vacated of all the ideas people, because they're all trying to create the next sort of hybrid sports book.
Right.
But so there's now the perfect opportunity for someone to be fantasy first and say, hey, no, this isn't some combination of sports books and fantasy. Fantasy itself deserves to have someone devoted to innovation in the space. And so that's what we're doing.
That's awesome, man. I mean, you look around us and everyone's talking about short form video. And as you said, TikTok, the attention spans are getting shorter. I mean, this idea it's a match made in heaven in terms of timing, from what it sounds like. I mean, was your consideration that you are going after a specific audience, or this is essentially built for anyone?
Well, a lot of PrizePicks just announced an acquisition in the many billions of dollars, and their first product, their first sort of, I think the original company was called Side Prize,
Right.
where you're in a fantasy league with your friends and you want to bet just you and your friend a side bet, a side prop, which fantasy team is going to score the most points this year. And
Mm-hmm.
that was the original concept of the idea. And then later on, the notion of prop style picks uh, becoming a fantasy game was invented. And with FastDraft, the original idea was that there is nowhere for dynasty leaguers. Dynasty is becoming very popular in fantasy, but there's really no way to monetize the whole notion of dynasty. You have all these dynasty podcasts, people playing dynasty super passionately, and there's really not a real money gaming option for dynasty leaguers other than just being in a league and paying each other through PayPal. And so I said, well, if we had a best ball game that was just rookies, dynasty leaguers would love that because they're talking rookies all like half the season is just rookie talk, rookie talk, rookie talk. So we
Right.
created, the idea was, hey, you can draft 6 rookies and the top 4 rookies will enter your lineup every week, best ball style. That was the original format. And then in as you iterate and as you start to put ideas in front of actual players, someone said, well, why can't you just do that with veterans and let people just draft 6 veterans? And I was like,
Right.
well, I was like, well, I don't know. I mean, I think that would be interesting in that it early in the year, like early in the season, let's say March, April, May, most people that follow the NFL, they don't they don't feel comfortable drafting anyone beyond like player 60 in the player pool. Like the starting running backs, the 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 number 1 receivers on most
Right.
teams. That's who people really are focused on until you get into the summer and they can really dig into the depth charts. So I was like, well, for the majority of the offseason, this sort of lighter, faster best ball game is really going to get a lot of interest from casual people as well as experienced people that would want a game like that leading up into the summer. And so then
Mm-hmm.
that's how that format comes about. And then you start talking to other people and you're like, oh, you should do an all defense game. There's not an all defense game. There's a lot of passionate IDP people out there. And
Right.
then the formats just sort of grow from there. And all of a sudden you have a platform with lots of different product options. And that's just that you just start, if you listen to people that are playing, if you listen to your customers and you have an open mind, you know, just say, hey, this is the way the company is going to be run. This is the way the company is structured. These are the contests we're offering. I've been just listening to people that are, high volume players, experienced players, people that are, highly ranked in fantasy pros that are in this every day, all day. What kinds of games would you play? What kinds of games would your friends play? I also wanted to create a format that I could re-engage people that were fantasy fans, and then the leagues became too complicated and they just sort of abandoned fantasy. You can get those people back with something that's simpler and lighter and yet super fun.
Mhm.
Also, you can provide people that are new to fantasy with a format that's really easy to understand. Hey, you just need to draft 6 guys. This doesn't have to be that complicated. There's not necessarily any particular positions you need to go and draft for. You don't need to know all these depth charts. So this is also a game. Fast Draft is also a game where I envision a lot of people it being their first fantasy league, where you don't have to set your lineup. It's best ball style. There's no waiver wire, and
Mhm.
then you can go from Fast Draft to graduating and actually starting a league with you and your buddies. That's a lot more sophisticated, and in that way, you've got all like a huge pool of casual fantasy leaguers, 50 million plus in the United States and Canada that would play. Plus,
Mhm.
you've got all the experienced people that are going to want to create strategies around the game to chase those big prize pools.
Oh, lovely. I love that. I mean, one of the things that I found super interesting when the first time we spoke about the story, about your startup story, was that you have PlayerProfiler and FastDraft, and they both, in a way, feed off each other, which is pretty unique when I look at the sports tech startup world, where essentially you have these two entities that are symbiotic in a way.
Sure.
Uh, we would love to know more about how that came about.
Well, at the end of the day, I have ambitions to reach all fantasy gamers in some way. Put a product in front of them that will engage them, and advanced, sophisticated fantasy stats and metrics has a particular market. It's a strong market. It's people that are willing to spend a lot of money to be great at fantasy football, but it's not the majority, right? The
Hmm.
majority of people are not going to subscribe to the best, most sophisticated fantasy stats. How can you create a platform that you can engage everybody?
Right.
That was the idea behind it. And then the beauty is, as the years go on, we're going to be incorporating more of Player Profiler into FastDraft. So
Hmm.
our ambition is not just, be the number one fantasy app. It's be the preferred second screen for everyone that's watching sports. So
Beautiful.
as you watch sports, imagine a world where as soon as someone scores as soon as a player scores a touchdown, you have a live scoring experience that is fully connected to all of your fantasy teams,
Hmm.
and you can see that how the exact dollar amount that you just accrued value across all your tournaments. So you have people that are in 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 tournaments. They have hundreds of teams,
Yeah.
and you might have AJ Brown on hundreds of teams, and he scores a touchdown. Currently, you don't really know exactly what the impact was to you monetarily across all your fantasy teams, but you should. And so
Mhm.
that is a vision that we have. Also, if you're incorporating a lot of what we have with Player Profiler, news, alerts, injuries, advanced stats. So it's a research tool as well. You see a new
Yep.
player come onto the field, you have your phone in front of you, you already have FastDraft open because you see all the live scores pouring in. You can also just type in that player's name. And a lot of the elements that we have in Player Profiler will over time be incorporated into FastDraft. So it becomes your co-pilot while you're watching sports, as well as the place where you're watching your bankroll go up and down as players meet or exceed expectations.
Nice, nice. And just shifting gears a little bit on the product and tech side of things. I mean, the other thing that I found super interesting and refreshing is that you are a mobile first experience, which is the whole fast draft, quick experience. I mean, that's got to be critical today. So, I mean, in terms of your, let's say, roadmap for 2026, from a product point of view, what's coming up next?
Well, this is a pretty rare thing that you have a fantasy platform that is built from scratch, from the ground up, by the company that is doing all the marketing, is owning all the licenses.
Right.
Typically, what you'll have is, and this is even true in sports betting, where you have companies that giant sports books and casinos, and they don't own the underlying tech. They're
Right.
licensing the underlying tech from a European technology company, right?
Yep.
So you have these European sportsbook technology companies that have been around for decades. And if you're in America and you see, oh my God, all these markets have opened up, are you going to take the time, 2 years, to build your own technology? Or are you going to go ahead and license it from a place in Europe? Well, the problem is, when there are issues or when you want to customize, you don't have that kind of flexibility, right? And we've seen this time and time again with fantasy platforms, because fantasy platforms have a couple really difficult problems to solve. The live draft experience is very tricky. And some of
Mm.
the most sophisticated companies, they really struggle with the live draft experience, people getting kicked out of drafts, people getting the wrong players selected. for lots of reasons, linking up 10 people to all synchronize and draft is very difficult. It's a very difficult technical problem to solve, as well as the live scoring experience. When you're talking about aggregating, tens, hundreds of thousands of lines of stats and syncing them across all these teams in a matter of seconds, it's just not easy to do. So our ability to quality control that allows us to ensure that the user experience is phenomenal. I am on the app every day, all day, critiquing every aspect of it to make sure that our engineers are building it to be the best, the fastest, the easiest to use app, because ultimately that's what's going to win the day. Is the difference between $1 million prize pool and a $2 million prize pool going to make the big difference? No. It's going to be, is this fun, fast, and easy when I go and play? Regardless of like the exact dollar amount of the first prize. So that's one of those things where I think a lot of focus is on marketing and because there's existing tech and we can just license it. Well, okay, you can do that. It's perfect. There's a lot of companies that do, and some of them are very successful, but you're immediately ceding control of the platform. And you also don't have the ability to implement new ideas. So let's say that you want to pivot. Let's say you want to radically change the user experience because of just a new expectation of the user base. Well, you might be waiting. If you're licensing third-party software, you could be waiting 6 months, a year. You don't have that level of control, where on a whim, we can shuffle priorities and say, oh no, our user base has spoken. They need the ability to, for example, we have something called turbo mode, where you can submit an order to say draft these teams with these rankings instantly as drafts happen, and I don't need to be in the app at all.
Right.
Well, customers want for our big best ball product, the Rabbit, they want to be able to have stacking as a sort of setting in that turbo setup. So they're like, okay, not only do I want to set my rankings, but I also want to say, if I draft Joe Burrow, I want there to be a higher likelihood that I'm going to draft Joe Burrow's tight end later on in the draft. When there's a choice between Mike Gesicki and some other fringe tight end, I want to make sure I'm getting Mike Gesicki. Well, we need to develop a toggle switch that says, hey, how much stack preference do you want to give to these rankings? Right. And so that is something that, we can deploy smart people to develop that. We could roll that out in a matter of months, where it might be years before another product would be able to put that in front of people.
Nice. I love that. I mean, pace and keeping up to the expectations of customers is so critical. And I love the sound of that. And then in terms of the product, I remember we spoke and you mentioned the Draft TV that's coming in, and video as an integral part of what the next 1 or 2 years might look like within the app. I mean, that's almost like a new media format where fantasy meets live broadcasting in a way. What's the vision there?
So there's a whole bunch of stakeholders that we talk to and we listen to. The customers being number one, our own staff. We talked about, I have a lot, numerous advisors in the space that play fantasy, at scale. And then there's also our affiliates. Our affiliates are essential. The podcasters that are playing and promoting FastDraft, the number one thing that they ask for is, hey, we want a better experience to share on our YouTube channel, on Twitter, X. We want to be able to draft live and have it be a television quality experience. And that's what we're developing. We're developing something called Draft TV, which is this sort of innovation in the space where the draft board is going to be something that is, at a level that you could see it be broadcasting on television. The NFL draft is the second biggest event in all of sports in the United
Yeah.
States.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something about the NFL draft that people love tuning in for. I also believe that when you look at, what the video gaming space where they've been really successful on platforms like Twitch
Mm-hmm.
is to broadcast someone at some expert, some top level player playing Call of Duty, for example. And you see a lot of people tuning in and watching another player play Call of Duty. Again, this for boomers like myself, I'm not a boomer, but when you first see that, you're like, this is crazy. Why don't you just play the game yourself? And they're like, no, I like to play the game myself, but I also like to watch the best in the world play. It's almost like sports. And so fantasy needs that as well. The Twitchification of fantasy needs to happen, because I think there's a lot of people that we've talked to that would absolutely love to watch someone else draft if that experience was a high quality broadcast. And there's a lot you can do with that, right? With AI now, you can have an
Yeah.
AI broadcaster who is announcing the picks as they come in and commenting on those picks. There's the ability for people to chat, and also just anyone sharing their draft. I'm drafting now. I'm not a podcaster. I don't need to share my draft necessarily with thousands of people in my audience, but I could post it on Twitter, a link to my draft TV experience, and hey, watch me draft. I'm about to sit down and do a rabbit draft for 20 minutes on FastDraft. Watch me. Leave your comments. Who do you think I should be picking next? Do you agree with my picks? And it becomes a social experience. There's so many ways that we can enhance the peer-to-peer gaming aspect of fantasy and really lean into that. I mean, that is
Yeah.
the biggest difference between fantasy and sports betting. Is one is you do it alone.
Right.
It's you versus the casino, and you're almost always losing. The other is you against others, or you
Yeah.
with others,
Right.
right? Competing with your friends. And we want to lean into those elements. And they're both gaming and they both have benefits. But I believe the benefits of peer-to-peer gaming in the long run are outweigh the benefits, the social benefits, especially to anything against the house.
No, absolutely. You just gave me the title of this podcast, which is the Twitchification of fantasy. I mean, that's box office stuff. That's a nice one, Matt. I'm a huge believer in the video side of things, and how, like, especially live video at the right time when you have fantasy can, like, really turn the tables, or and might be the difference between a win and a loss for a user, especially if he has some good expert people to fall back on.
Yeah, and a
Um,
lot of these streamers that are streaming their drafts right now, they're going to the back end software of whatever place they're drafting.
right,
That's not designed to be shared with an audience, number one. And number
right.
two, these drafts take so long typically that you lose audience as you get to round 16, 17, 18. You start getting into the second and third receiver on bad teams. People disengage.
Yeah,
You start to lose audience. Like, well, I got to finish this draft. I can't not finish the draft, but I'm looking at my audience numbers ticking down, 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 down. As this is all playing out live, the beauty is not only is our experience a higher quality broadcast level experience, but also FastDraft wraps these drafts up in 20 minutes. The longest drafts take 20 minutes. So this isn't
yeah.
something that you need to worry about your audience getting fatigued watching you draft on FastDraft. So these are some of the things that when we're talking to affiliates, they have choices. They can do a draft on any platform. They can talk about any platform. They can talk about the average draft position, the ADP for particular
Hmm.
players. When talking about value, they can talk about it related to any platform. Why FastDraft? Like, we need to give them reasons why. Number one, a lot fewer people have FastDraft right now than a lot of the big legacy players. So we can generate a lot more new users for affiliates. That's one great benefit. But also, we want to create an experience that is a better viewing experience for everybody involved.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that I'm a huge fan of is folks and startups building in sports tech that have one eye on retention, because there's one aspect of acquiring users, but then once they're on, how do you keep them engaged enough so that they don't churn, right? So churn management or retention is a big factor. That leads me to my next question, Matt, on monetization. I mean, if you want to just throw some light for investors watching or even viewers listening in terms of the way you generate revenues and what the plans there are.
So a peer-to-peer game in fantasy, the number one way or the way that uh, uh, the company would generate revenue or profits, right? So there's gross revenue, which is all the entry fees paid, and then there's net revenue, which is just what's called the rake.
Yep.
And now I don't like that word because it's like that word's like from Gangs of New York, right? How was the rake today? And it's like, hey man, it's not like that. We
Yeah.
have to administer a platform. We have fees that we have to pay, technology fees to support this whole thing,
Yeah.
and
Of course. Yeah.
that's what the rake is there for. The rake
Right.
can vary depending on the game, anywhere from 10 to 20%. And that's the nice thing is, like, this is not a situation where the house always wins. The house gets a cut. So in this way, it's more similar to poker than it is a lot of other games. So if you're running a poker room, it'd be a very similar thing where, hey, we're providing the facilities, we're providing the dealer, we're providing all these things, and then you all can come and play cash games, and then we get a percentage of this to manage everything, and then there's a profit margin, and at scale it becomes very profitable, of
Yeah.
course, right? So if you take 15% of $1 million prize pool, suddenly that's $150,000.
Yeah.
So it can be very profitable, but you need to scale. And you need to have at least, say, 10,000 drafters, people that are, have deposited real money, are playing. Once you get to, say, 10,000, then you can start to really hit like a level of profitability. And we're sort of marching in that direction. But then once you reach that, and okay, we have a nice profitable business here, then you can really start to scale. And then all of a sudden, this is where you get sort of some hockey stick growth. And there's a couple elements that that will make FastDraft in the long run, I think, just as profitable as a sports book. Number one, the time on app, the more efficient use of time on app is
Right.
essential. So in the past, I'm doing a draft game like we talked about, I might pay one entry fee and spend an hour, right? Well, with FastDraft, with our turbo mode, and just with the format itself being so much more streamlined, you can quadruple, quintuple the amount of spend per time on app. So it's just a much more efficient use of time, and you can generate a lot more revenue. And the fantasy gamers themselves can have a lot more fun per minute on the app. There's less waiting for someone to pick. There's less waiting through players no one really cares about. So there's just a lot of things that, everybody sort of wins in that way. The gamers win, the platform wins, when you can start to create more scale and efficiencies inside the game. And as you also lean into peer-to-peer, there's a whole network effect that you get with a fantasy that doesn't really exist with sports betting, where we the ability to friend one another, the ability to invite people to join you in a cash game, the ability to and compete. There's a lot of ways that you can lean into this idea of a social gaming environment, because nowadays, in 2025, 2026 is where we're going to be pretty soon. Email, social media, all these mechanisms for customer acquisition are becoming less and less effective. But
Absolutely.
platforms like Discord, communities of users where they've given, not only they've given their permission for you to speak to them, but they've said, hey, I'm actively a member of this community. And if Discord is the place where people are going, that is a clue that is the future of onboarding a user base, is to lean into this idea of peer-to-peer gaming and creating communities of users that want to play amongst each other and watch each other on a scoreboard. So for example, why is there not an ability for me to see a separate scoreboard inside a tournament, let's say, right? So I'm in a tournament, I see the standings and it's me and I'm in, 550th place. But I could also tab over to the other standings, which is just me and my friends. Right. So so these are some elements where you could see, okay, you can have a lot more people playing. And with fantasy, and this is, stats from the FSGA will show this, fantasy gamers have a lot more durability. So you're going to play fantasy from a lot longer. So when we talk about the lifetime value of a customer, their spend over time, they're spending a lot more time and they're less likely to churn from a fantasy game where it's not just, am I winning or losing, but I'm doing this with a group of people and this is fun, as opposed to I'm doing this alone and it's me against the book. And if I get run over, I'm out and I'm off the platform. The fantasy gamer is at least in some cases, 3 times longer lifespan playing fantasy than some other sort of against the house contest or format.
Right. Yeah, I completely hear you on the opportunity with the social gaming aspect. I mean, the next question, I purposely left it for the last part of the podcast, is the not so fun question and variable that we have been tracking in India. Because, in India, what happened is real money gaming got banned overnight almost. So platforms like Dream 11, which were fantasy for primarily cricket, because of regulations that came in, their business is now pivoted to sports AI and a free fantasy element versus a paid and a pot element where there's something to win at the end of the tunnel. What is your, how does it look like, I guess, is the question in the US? Because I know every state has different regulations. And I'm assuming that because of your standing and experience, you're able to solve for that a lot better.
Well, that is an existential risk of any business, is that one day the government's going to decide to change the rules on your business. So that is everybody. That's AI. That's every, especially the hotter the business, the hotter the market, the hotter the sector, the more likely you are to have a government regulator come in and change the rules on you. So that's a very common existential risk. People ask this all the time, like, what are the risks to your business? And that is certainly the idea that the United States federal government bans fantasy is an existential risk. However, it's a much lower existential risk than, say, it is to say something new that is currently being exploited, right? So why would a government regulator get involved? Well, first of all, for the next 3 years in the United States, no one is afraid of government regulation affecting their business for the next 3 years, at least.
Right.
Okay. So for a lot of reasons, we're in a great spot. Everyone in gaming is in a very comfortable spot for at least the next 3 years, but probably much longer, just the way things are trending.
Right.
But with fantasy, the beauty of fantasy is fantasy has become mainstreamed in a way that none of these other gaming formats, real money gaming types don't have the benefit of fantasy football, in that if you were to poll the audience, if you were to, like, for example, if you're a politician and you were to poll the audience, fantasy would rank number 1 in terms of what does the public enjoy most? What does the public want to protect most? We went through this whole exercise 10 years ago where state by state by state, there's like 3 states that decided, okay, we're going to leave fantasy banned, and we're not going to, pass specific laws that separate fantasy from something like sports betting, gambling. So there's just a handful of states that didn't do that, and those states are typically small. It's like Hawaii and Idaho. There's a couple states like that that are out there. The rest of the states went out of their way to say, hey, fantasy is a separate category of gaming. And we're now 10 years in from that happening. And in the last few years, not only have you seen just very little change in any state's laws around fantasy, at the same time, there's been a lot of a movement to change the rules around sweepstakes, change rules around sports betting. There's still states coming online, states changing the rules and regulations around sports betting. It's shifting under your feet at all times. If you're DraftKings or you're, some novel sweepstakes company. And now there's all this talk about prediction markets, and there's all this uncertainty around prediction markets and what's going to happen with prediction markets. And you see is, jurisdictional debate and, who's going to end up winning it on this. The beauty of fantasy is it's not crypto based. It's real money. People can, deposit with a credit card. They can deposit with, bank card or PayPal or whatever it is, and they can play, and then they can withdraw with some of those same methods. And this has been legal, codified across most states in the United States for the last 10 years. And like I said, recently there's been almost no change at all to those regulations. So if there was a safe format for gaming of any kind, it would be fantasy sports. And our job is to be able to leverage that and say, hey, okay, we're in this comfortable space where this is mainstream, right? That, athletes are going to be much more likely to promote a fantasy game at this point than they would sports betting, just because there's been scandals with sports betting in recent years. I can't remember the last, scandal around fantasy. So, and I, as the leader of the company, the founder, I am actively seeking investors, but I want investors that want to be involved in some way beyond just investing in the business. So for example, I'm looking for athlete investor spokesman. I'm looking for someone like a Rob Gronkowski that's going to come in, invest in the business, but also play and talk about it and educate his audience and his fans about it. And you're just much more likely to be able to secure that spokesman as a mainstream, fantasy gaming type that, you're not going to alienate any member of your audience by promoting it, right? It's like when I saw LeBron as a spokesman for DraftKings, I was like, wow, I can't believe we're here. He's an active player. Right? He's an active player promoting sports betting. If LeBron was around 10 years ago, so if I told myself, I've got a time machine, went back 10 years and say, hey, by the way, do you know LeBron's going to be promoting a sports book as an active player? I'd be like, well, that's impossible for all these reasons. Like, no. It is possible. This is the world we're living in. There is a possibility that some additional restrictions around sports betting get implemented in the years ahead for all these reasons, like especially the scandal, but also just there's a general there's a general notion that is being put forth that you start to see more of these articles come out in different publications, different anecdotes getting told about young men in particular having problems with sports betting. And that's becoming more pervasive, and you're seeing more and more politicians speak out about it. And it is becoming a topic. And the one sort of segment of gaming that seems to be the most protected, or I would say is the most protected from scandal, from sort of a political overhaul, is fantasy sports. And that's one of the benefits that we have, and why we want to be fantasy first. We are a fantasy first company. We have no desire to become anything other than the best fantasy experience. And if we can own the fantasy space by devoting all of our time, resources, and attention to it, and be the preferred platform for everyone that wants to play fantasy football, fantasy baseball, fantasy everything, F1, golf, you name it, then not only we can take advantage of all the benefits that come with that. That we talked about the scale and the revenue that you can generate at scale, but also a place where it's a much safer and more socially acceptable place for especially young people to spend their time and to get access to sort of adding fun to the sports watching experience. That's what we're here to do. And when you actually see people doing it, that's the best. When you're in a group of people and they have FastDraft and they're watching the live scores pour in and the performances pour in, and you can see the excitement and the fun that people are having when they're either drafting or they're watching their scores. That's what really it makes me proud, and also gives me that peace of mind that we made the right decision to become not only a place that gives people advice about how to draft the best team, but now be the place where they actually are doing the drafting.
Right. No, I love it. I love the energy, and it's great that you've drawn the distinction between betting and fantasy for our audience. Um, I guess last question. This has been super enjoyable, Matt. Thank you for your time. But in terms of your prediction for fantasy sports, like we're 2026 almost, what does it look like going forward? The whole Twitchification of the space, as you say.
So fantasy sports has been growing consistently for the last 20 years, since they started tracking the growth of the sector from like 2005 to 2025. It is one of the it is consistent. I mean, there was like a flat line there from like 2008 to 2009 when the economy in the United States absolutely collapsed. And then, but there's just this consistent growth of the sport, and it's driven by just the fact that people want to play with each other. Uh, I'm just blessed. I'm blessed to be in a place where we can talk sports all day. We can provide people with ways to play that are not exploitive. And I think that is going to be one of but there needs to be innovation. There needs to be new platforms, new gaming formats that come out. And I predict that between now and when we become the biggest fantasy platform, I think there is going to be some plateauing of the growth of the fantasy space, because there has not been a concerted effort to build new games. So, for example, if sports betting was never legalized 10 years ago, what kinds of cool, fun fantasy games would DraftKings and FanDuel have created in the last 10 years? How would the industry have grown over the last 10 years if the sports betting platforms hadn't sucked the oxygen out of the room from an innovation standpoint? It's our job to kind of restart that and really be the tip of the spear in sort of restarting the growth of like peer-to-peer gaming is going to grow over the years, as and fantasy should be at the forefront of that. And it's our job to kind of put it on our shoulders and, look back in 5 years and say, hey, thank God for FastDraft, right? The growth of this industry would not have continued without it, especially with the formats that we've created that are going to engage people when they're not yet familiar. The fact that our games are so easy to play for someone that has never played fantasy sports before, when you look at the total available market, let's say there's 57 million people that play right now, which is still many more people than sports bet. A lot of people don't know that there's a lot more people that play fantasy, and that has not declined at all. And I think if we can continue to engage people that are new to fantasy and provide them with this entry into the industry with just the super simple, easy game. It's an easy app to download and get started playing. It's a lot easier than a sports book to get set up with an account. It's a lot easier to play our fantasy game than it is any other. And that's how we can onboard a lot more sports fans in general these people can become sophisticated fantasy fans if you provide them with a portal in. That's what's missing right now. The level of education that is required to get a new user engaged in real money fantasy gaming is high. And that's
Right.
I think we're going to look back at the growth of fantasy in the next 5 years, and FastDraft will be a big part of that, because we will be helping to, create that ramp for new people to the space to engage with fantasy and enjoy it. So my prediction is that the industry will continue to grow and that we will be the tip of that spear.
Nice. Awesome, man. Yeah, you are, from what it sounds like, significantly lowering the barriers to entry for anyone to take to a fun and social way of gaming and fantasy sports. More about you. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it. And happy holidays.
Thank you.